to Cannabis Equity News with Cynthia Mompoint. Today is April 9th, 2021, and a lot is happening. Again, April is a hot month when it comes to cannabis always. We have 420 coming up. And just in terms of legalization across the country, we have a lot happening. Last week, we saw New York legalize, which was a major, major move. And it's something for us to continue to watch and pay attention when it comes to equity, because we want to measure and see what states are doing to ensure that not only are we talking the talk about equity, but we're actually doing something that pushes the needle, moves the data that we see when we look at the participation of those who have been harmed by the war on drugs, by Black and brown folks, by people who are traditionally left out of the legal side, being able to enter in at any level. I think one of the things that is interesting here in Massachusetts is we do break it down into 4 levels. When we look at our social equity program, we have the reentry level, we have the job opportunity level, we have the managerial experience level, and then we have the entrepreneurship level. And so that gives space and headway for all the different tracks and paths that people may want to participate. And I think even with that, there's still different other avenues that still need to be considered. So we're going to continue to pay attention. If you're joining in, welcome. The goal here with Cannabis Equity Minutes is to bring information and equity lens to the things that are happening across the country. Just because we're talking about legalization doesn't mean we're automatically talking about equity, because what we've seen just in the last 5 years or so, if you look at the ACLU's report that they dropped last year, a year ago this month, for 420, where they looked at the data, and it showed that even in states where cannabis has been legalized, the disparity in arrest rates continued. And so you have to think to yourself, so wait a minute, we legalized the drug, we legalized the plant, I should say, even though it's still classified as a Schedule I drug, and yet people are still being arrested? Absolutely. People are being arrested and getting serious time for possession of the plant in some places, and then for cultivation or manufacturing of the product. And so it's important that we keep abreast as to the measures that states are putting in for equity, and not just assuming just because it's legal that we've achieved some type of retribution, or we're actively redressing the harms done by the war on drugs. So the latest addition to the legal states has been Virginia. Earlier this week, Virginia went legal, which Virginia already decided that they were going to legalize in 2024. However, the governor had an agenda to push it up to 2021. They took a vote, and the governor, I guess, was the tipping vote. And so you'll see cannabis is legalized in Virginia effective July 1st of this year. And it'll probably take them some time to roll out. And in their legalization, the push, they did specifically talk about social equity. Let's not take it for granted. Not everyone even uses that term across the states. It's becoming a growing trend. And so how different states understand social equity to be, and what they're actually going to do and mandate at the state level or the regulatory level, is going to be important for us to keep a pulse on. So with Virginia, they are their legalization allows for possession of up to an ounce, which last week I was complaining about New York's 3 ounces. Here we have 1 ounce. It's a start. Is it enough? Probably not, because that means if anyone has any type of amount over that, or there's a suspect of any amount over that, then there's going to be grounds for some type of enforcement against them for accessing the plant. They also are allowing for folks to grow up to 4 plants, which I think makes it's important to have some type of access, considering they don't have dispensaries opening up immediately, which is something Massachusetts did. And if you track with us here in Massachusetts, we are constantly talking about the fact that There were folks who claimed that they were going to open up a medical dispensary in Massachusetts, and they didn't. They haven't. They just leveraged that position so that they can open up their recreational. And so we see a great rise in the numbers of businesses, recreational businesses here in Massachusetts, leveraging that medical priority. We've talked quite a bit about that on Mass Mother Mary, and it'll probably come up a little bit more. Switching gears, talking about what's happening in Massachusetts specific, if you follow what the Cannabis Control Commission puts out, they have just put out a request to develop a platform that will online platform. So web development, any of you tech folks, if you are interested, check it out on the Cannabis Control Commission's website, where they're looking for some IT folks to put together a platform that will allow businesses to more readily reach and access those who have been harmed by the war on drugs and are looking for opportunities to enter the legal side. And, that's an important move. One of the things that I think a lot of the regulatory bodies can play a significant role in as we legalize is ensuring that the communities that have been marginalized are brought into the fray, in the conversation, and in the legal space, in the business space. We called the CCC out on the fact that when cannabis was legalized recreationally at first in Massachusetts, and the first equity program, the economic empowerment program that they had here in Massachusetts, they dropped the ball in terms of not bringing the economic empowerment folks together and creating a platform where the information can be disseminated as to what to do next, what's happening next, and versus some of the bigger players who had the access to their networks. Networks matter. So they had access to their networks in terms of access to the municipalities, attorneys, and so forth, and how to navigate the space and get the leg up, first leg in, first mover's advantage, if you will, in Massachusetts. So the fact that they're making the move now, great. We need it. Folks still want to get an opportunity in the industry. Some folks are just trying to figure out, how do I get a job? Where do I go to? They might go to a job fair and still not get the ropes of it. So we'll see how this platform rolls out, and pay attention to see what else the CCC continues to do in the area of equity, because we've been suffering for some time. We're starting to gain traction, and I think the traction that we make, the noise that we make in terms of demanding that equity be a key component in the legalization efforts and measures across the country, we're going to see more and more states take it seriously and say, hey, we need to factor this in, keep this into consideration. Some of the states that have been legal for quite some time are just now having this conversation, despite the fact that their citizens, their residents have been making noise for some time, like, hey, something needs to happen to ensure that we, those who have been harmed by the war on drugs, that Black and Brown owners are represented in the industry as well. And so we're seeing states like Washington that wants to revisit their policies, and you hear the governor and some of the legislature talking about addressing and taking a look at social equity programs across the country and identifying what's been successful, what hasn't been. And that's something that we are keeping a pulse on, and we'll continue to highlight what are some of the things that are important. We know across the board it takes money. It takes money to erect a business in this industry, especially if you're in a state like Massachusetts that's highly regulated. And so capital needs to be at the forefront. Capital needs to be set aside. And if the government is going to play a key role in regulating what it is that we're doing, then they need to make sure they play a key role in ensuring that the resources are there. You're calling it an equity program. Well, what measures are you doing to ensure that there's equity in your program and equity in your industry? And when we talk about equity, you need to be looking at the differences. What are the gaps? Where are the areas of gaps that are preventing or serving as barriers for those who have been traditionally harmed, traditionally marginalized, to entering into this space? And so we're looking at capital, we're looking at networking and access to certain technical resources, legal resources, financial, professional, I should say, resources. When I say financial, I'm not just talking about the capital, but professional in terms of understanding the ins and outs of operating a business within these regulated parameters. We want to make sure that these things are in place. There's a heavy focus on business. Why? Because we live in a capitalistic society. I mean, the green rush is because of the green that's tied to that green. So, we're talking about the dollars tied to the plant. And if we see that as value and important in an industry, let's not try to make light of that when it comes to talking about equity. It's not just a matter of, okay, we're not going to arrest you anymore for small possession. No, we want to ensure that folks are able to participate at whatever level they want to participate. You want to own a business, then and you've been harmed by the plant, we need to make sure that we have the measures in place to support your efforts to do that. And if you have local municipality control, as we do here in Massachusetts, then it's incumbent upon the regulators to communicate to the local municipalities like, hey, look, we respect your authority. However, this is what our mandate is. And in order for that to take place, we need to see you have your version of equity programs in order for us to start issuing licenses in that. And again, this is a Massachusetts specific issue. However, it's going to resonate in other areas, and you're going to be able to see in your specific state how what are some of the barriers, whether they be political or financial barriers that folks may try to waive as a reason as to why the social equity program or equity measures cannot be successful, or they have to hold off and do research. There's a lot of research that has already been done. We talk about the capital that is necessary. We talk about the networking and the technical assistance and the resources that are necessary. One of the things that we highlighted in that New York is doing, and I don't necessarily see that yet. Again, Virginia just came out and said that they haven't even gone through any of the regulatory measures that they're going to put out. But one of the things that they said that they're going to be doing is having a certain percentage of licenses that they want to encourage and see going to equity program participants. Something that Massachusetts put in legislation, but we didn't necessarily execute very well on, was the fact that we granted a priority status to equity applicants. And what does that mean? That means if you were an economic empowerment applicant, or if you are, it's still in play right now, and you submit your application is going to be reviewed before everyone else's application. And so that, again, gives the sense of the first mover's advantage and being able to open up shop, being able to access some of the better locations and opportunities if there are caps in certain areas. We have caps in Massachusetts. So if there are caps in your region, then supposedly that was the intended goal. At the state level, there wasn't a strong enough enforcement of that, and so we did not see that play out the way that it could have potentially been. And so these are things that it's incumbent upon the community to hold their state regulators, their local regulators accountable for. There are meetings, there are opportunities out there. It's about getting plugged in, getting access to that information, finding out who are the people that are in the know, and not just in the know for themselves, but are in the know to spread that information out to the community. Here in Massachusetts, we had numerous organizations that have touted that they are representing equity and wanting to bring the voice of equity when it came to legalization. We don't hear them so much now, and a lot of it is because we have a lot of things already rolling out in the state. We just came out with our delivery regulations last year, and there was a lot of conversations on how to ensure that it is prioritized and for equity applicants, equity owners. And what ended up happening is that we have a 3-year exclusivity period with our delivery licenses going specifically just for equity program participants, whether they're economic empowerment or social equity. And if you're just joining in, whether you're here in Massachusetts or elsewhere, and you're not sure what the difference is, the economic empowerment program is explicitly targeted to entrepreneurs or folks who had demonstrated the ability to empower their community. And the window for being a part of that program was very short. It was in 2018. It was a 2-week window. 123 folks got that. However, what the state has continued is to open up the social equity program, which is why you hear me talk about both, which is open to a broader range of folks. You don't have to demonstrate the ability to empower your community. You simply have to demonstrate that you have been harmed by the war on drugs through having an arrest record, or that you live in an area that has been disproportionately impacted, and and they've determined that area. The state has determined that area. So it's not as though you can make the case for your area, but the state has determined that area based on the data that they have access to. And if you hear me go into discussion about Massachusetts and how we've defined our disproportionate areas of impact, I always have a gripe with it because it doesn't fully capture the actual populations who've been harmed by the war on drugs. You've got folks who are capitalizing on the opportunity. And so just to say that isn't enough. And we need to make sure that we have provisions or measures that are explicit. And so I think one of the provisions that Massachusetts tweaked was to say that if you have an arrest record tied to a marijuana-related arrest record, then you can qualify for the social equity program. Shout out to the folks joining in. I just want to say hello and thanks for the support coming through. This conversation around equity is significantly important. And I'm always reminded when I see certain folks come into our lives as to what's happening across the country, where here it is, we'll have legalization, and people who were harmed by this war on drugs and are still being left out of the conversation because of the way the regulators and the legislators are erecting the laws and then the policies. If you say you want to address the war on the address the harm done by the drug war, then you need to ensure that the policy that you put out does that. And if when you take your policy and you weigh it against the people who have been harmed and you're not reaching them, they're not able to access the legal side of this industry and fully take advantage the way that they were taken advantage of through enforcement when it was prohibited, then you need to go back and revisit it. Simply because someone had a felony crime or a large possession crime or distribution crime should not be grounds for them not being able to enter the legal side of engaging with the very same plant. The only thing that has changed is the moral compass, if you will, of the people who are making the decision around the laws. The plant hasn't changed. How folks are engaging with it has not changed. It's just a decision to make laws around it and to cap and tax it and to capitalize on it financially in a greater way. The government has made that decision. So if you want to talk about equity and social equity, we need to make sure that we are putting in place measures that are going to allow for people to participate fully. And if you're not, then you're not doing equity. You're doing the bare, it's not even, I wouldn't even call it the bare minimum to say that you've now decriminalized possession. That you did what you need to do to say that it's legal in your state. But if you're still arresting folks, if you're still targeting children, if you still see, if we can talk about disparity of arrests in your state, then that's a problem. And I understand federally, we're still dealing with a plant that is scheduled, and until it's descheduled, we're going to have issues with that. However, we can't have you can't have it in your state where it's legal and you're still pushing enforcement. It just, you haven't addressed the war on drugs. Then you don't say that you have when you have not, because the war still continues. There are still targets out there. There are still people who are falling victim to just engaging with the plant, if you will. So hold on, I want to just see a couple right here. Okay. And that's our check-in in terms of the Cannabis Equity Minutes. If folks have questions or comments and you want to chime in, please feel free to chime in and share your piece. in terms of what we need to be doing in equity. I think something else that we put out or in our social equity report that needs to happen when we talk about um, engaging the community, we need to see measures, and technology it's not that difficult to tap into the community and say, hey, what does equity look like to you? Because it's not going to look the same to someone who is looking to erect a business and they don't have a record. They don't have a history of being criminalized, and the stigma and the trauma and attacks tied to enforcement against them. However, we don't see that yet, and until we have these conversations, until there is space for these voices to be heard, which is what we're inviting folks here in the Cannabis Equity Minutes platform. Come out, come share your piece, and let your voice be heard, because it's not going to get done if we continue to rely on the folks who have been the ones enforcing prohibition and have now decided, oh wait, we want to tax, or we want to capitalize, we want to legalize. If we're expecting them to now turn around and listen to that, we need to come together, speak up, and create opportunities for that, so that it is reflective. We have in Massachusetts, we've talked about funding, and it's a little ironic, because I turned around and we put together a PIES program, which would put the onus on the industry through their positive impact activity to help support equity participants in erecting businesses. And I received pushback from other folks who claim to be activists in the space, and they've done their activism for legalization, and said that folks harmed by the war on drugs aren't entitled to what amounts to, in their eyes, a handout. And I looked at it and I said to myself, well, what's the price? What is the price for someone who has been arrested for engaging in a plant? The tax that they paid, the things that they were taken away from them, whether it was just an arrest or whether that arrest led to a conviction, and that conviction led to time, and that time led to a loss of family, a loss of resources, a loss of jobs, a loss of opportunities, all of these things. And to turn around and say that they aren't entitled to receiving support to erect a business, it's not as though the business is going to run itself. They're still going to have to run a business successfully. However, in terms of going through an additional gauntlet, if you will, just to get to that door opening up, our plan, our PIES program says, hey, let's have the industry help support that. And the pushback said, no, wait till, in Massachusetts case, wait till the legislators decide to push forward a social equity fund, again, which is why it's important. If in your state, you're just now starting out with your social equity measures, and you're just now legalizing, you want to make sure that capital is included to support equity program participants. Capital is included to be reinvested back in the communities that have been disproportionately impacted and are still serving disproportionately impacted folks. You want to make sure that the funds are being directed there and not into other measures around enforcement, unless it's going to enforcement under the guise of educating law enforcement on how to shift gears from their traditional practice. So in Massachusetts, there are certain places where Black folks are 4 times as likely to be arrested for their engagement with the plant as opposed to their white counterparts. Virginia, their data said it was about 3.5 times. New York, it's like 2.6 times or something like that. And so how do we educate our law enforcement so that they are no longer training with this disparity lens, and so that they're not targeting folks? And so if the funds are going anywhere towards enforcement, it needs to be around reprogramming, re-educating the community at large as well, so that the stigma doesn't continue. And if you really want to address the drug war, we need to start there, because they have to be trained in terms of, hey, you need to target these communities. Now there needs to be a retraining and a reprogramming. hey, we're not targeting these communities. One, we don't want to see arrests for these. In fact, we want to see funds. We want to see programming around rehabilitation. We want to see programming around access and education and understanding how this plant can be beneficial for those who are participating in the use of this plant, right? And for this evening, I always said that, Cannabis Equity Minutes, we just want to give you quick sound bites in terms of what's happening, reminders as to what to keep your pulse on, highlight some things that are really good that we see starting to roll out and continue to push the conversation and be present and have our voice heard when it comes to legalization. And even if you have legalized in your state, that the buck doesn't stop there. The conversations continue, and we see that with the likes of Washington and even Colorado, where they're now saying, "Hey, maybe we need to take a look at social equity. We need to look at what we're doing to ensure that it's not taken over just by the traditional white male owners, and that we do have folks who have been harmed by the war on drugs, yet who participated in this with the plant through measures that equate to ownership, to measures that equate to cultivation, to measures that equate to a legal distribution business, a legal, or just even having your own plants, the ability to grow your own plants. We want to have these conversations and ensure that the laws around those are or even policies around those are being implemented, or we're having conversations and they're being implemented in a way that the outcome, we want the outcome, not just the feel-good rhetoric, not just the feel-good, hey, let's bring all these people on board and have a Zoom conversation and talk about what we're doing. And then we turn around a year from now and look at the data and the numbers haven't changed. We look at the data and we're still talking about disparity in arrests. No, we don't want to talk about arrests, period. So we, even if your state has gone legal, you can have the conversation of equity pushed forward. We have certain folks who are putting lawsuits together. Support these folks, because that's how we're going to get our cause, our voice heard. We're going to see equity actually happen and effectuated. If not, it's going to be business as usual. And with that, I'm going to, if I don't have any questions or comments for folks at this time, I'm going to wrap up with Cannabis Equity Minutes for tonight and just let you know we'll be back next week. Massachusetts, you'll hear a lot more conversation because we'll be highlighting some of the businesses that have been making headway in terms of getting licenses, getting through the door, or Massachusetts has several levels of the licensing process. You get your provisional license, which is like the first step, but that doesn't mean you can open up yet, because now you have to go build out and do everything else, and then they'll come back and inspect your stuff, and aside from all the other paperwork and background checks, and then you'll get what's called the final license, and then you get the green light to operate. So we have a couple of folks who have gone through that gauntlet and made some headway. We have a couple of folks in the pipeline, and we definitely want to celebrate that, highlight that. And then for us, we have our cannabis controls meetings. That will be next week as well. And I know a lot of folks don't have that privilege to tap into a 2-3 hour meeting. So Cannabis Equity Minutes will be here, will be there, and following up next Friday to chime in and talk about what were some of the key opportunities and highlights around equity, what were any other potential opportunities that were missed and needs to be brought back into the forefront of the conversation so that equity is happening here on the Massachusetts front. And then, of course, anything else that's happening across the state. As I said, this is April, and the fourth month of the year, 420 coming up, and we see a lot of movement. A lot of folks are having conversations around legalization. Businesses are also starting to look at their own equity practices and trying to figure out what can we do. And so we want to continue to push that. So we'll probably touch on some of that, some of these impact plans next week. So tap in, tune in, feel free to reach out, comment, share, let us know what you see happening, what you want to hear us weigh in on. And thanks for the support. See you next week. That's been our time tonight on Cannabis Equity News with Cynthia Mompoint, and we are wrapping up I will see you next week. And we are live. Good evening, and welcome to Cannabis.